Okay, Parshas Tzav. So the parsha begins with that one word. Well, it doesn't. It's not literally the first word in the parsha, but Tzav es Aaron, Tzav. Why is there a command? Why is there a command here specifically? Rashi tells us. In a second, Rashi says, gives two explanations. They're both from the same medrash. The first one is, and the Ramban quotes this: "Ein tzav eloshen zeros miyad u'ledoros." The concept of a tzav as a command is to spur on, both for now and for future generations. So it's not only for this generation, but it's also future generations. Omar Rabbi Shimon b'yosef tzarach hakosav lezares v'mokum sheish b'chisaron kis. Rabbi Shimon is like a totally different explanation. That whereas the first explanation is to spur him on and the importance of it, etc., etc. Rabbi Shimon says, in a sense, it's almost they're not quite the opposite, but there's a need to spur him on because there's money, it costs, it's expensive. Now, the Ramban has an issue with this. If you look at the Ramban, he says right at the beginning, Omar Kosu b'Parshas Vayikra Dabel b'nei Yisrael. There, the first thing he notices is really the beginning of Tzav is really a continuation from Vayikra. Vayikra is all the Korbanos, and Tzav is also the Korbanos. The beginning of the Parshas, on the contrary, Rashi is at pains to try and explain to us why certain of the Korbanos seem to be repeated at the beginning of Tzav, right? So, what is the difference? The Ramban notices that Vayikra begins, Daber al b'nei Yisrael, speak to b'nei Yisrael. Kishom yitzaveh ha'bahavoas ha'korbanos. There it's talking about bringing the Korbanos. The Yisrael, Mavimosom, who brings the Korbanos? Israelim, right? That's who bring the korbanos. The kan omat tzav Aaron. Here the shift is to Aaron. Ki yadaber b'maaseh hakorbanos. Here it's talking about the actual procedure and what happens and how they're supposed to do it. V'hakohanim yasu esum, and it's the kohanim who perform this. And that's why here we switch to Aaron. So that's the first thing the Ramban notices. The fact that there's a difference in focus. Here we're focusing on Aaron. Then he quotes Rashi, these two explanations. And he says, we just skip that because we just saw that. He says there's a bit of a question on Rabbi Shimon because this command doesn't seem to reference any chisaron kis. The kohanim are not out of pocket from this bit. There's no lack of money. There's no loss of money here for Aaron the kohanim. They actually profit. Right, the kohanim get things out of the korbanos, even with an ola, they get the skins and everything else. Right, so even a fully burnt offering, they get something. So the kohanim actually benefit. The Tanakama says the first opinion in the Medrash is that the command is for now and for future generations. Loimar to say that the parshas about which the Torah wishes to spur them on, that applies now, but also it should continue for future generations. With them, it says the word tzav to command. And with other parshas, it just says speak to Bnei Yisrael or say to them. So that's the Tanakama, that there is something which is going on for future generations. And on that, Rabbi Shimon disputes and says, even with something which is not for future generations, but avur sheyesh bo chesaron kis, and that's because it has something where they will potentially be out of pocket. For example, the command which it says in tetzaveh, same thing, tzav, tetzaveh, right? Because presumably because there's an expenditure involved in the oil. Very interesting principle that Ramban is bringing out here. You see the word command that exists with the Bnei Yisrael when they're told to give cities to the Leviim. It's a big deal to give a city, not a simple thing. It's going to cost you a lot of money, right? So it's tzav. Okay, so how has he answered the question? We said that here there's no loss to the kohanim. Here the kohanim are profiting, right? He says it could be that the reference to the tzav, which has the command where there is a loss to the kohanim, there is a reference afterwards for this is the korban of Aaron and his sons, right, which is a continuation of this command. In other words, the next parsha. Okay, there it's spelt out the korban they have to offer on the day that they are initiated into the kahuna, right? That's the next bit, Pasuk Yud Gimel, and that's what it's referring to. Sifri says there it's said in the reference to a machlokas. So okay, so either way, what I think we're learning from this Ramban is a very interesting principle. It is that the concept of a command is necessary where there is something holding you back from doing it, right? The Tanakama it spells that in a different way. The Tanakama simply refers to if it's something which is a continuum and is going to continue, that's when it needs to say the word tzav. But according to Rabbi Shimon picks up on the almost like this human psychology of it, right? That if there's something which is holding you back, even if you want to do it and you know what the right thing is to do, you still need to be told to do it, right? You still need to be told. You need to be commanded. So the Bnei Yisrael have to be commanded to give away those cities, right? They have to be commanded to give the best oil for the menorah. And Aaron has to be commanded to give up whatever he needs to give up to bring the korbanos that he personally is obligated in. And it's very interesting, if you like, understanding of the way the Ramban broadens out this, which is after all the name of the parsha itself, is that we can sometimes think to ourselves, I'm committed. No, the lesson of the Torah is that there is nothing as committed as someone who is being told you must do this. It's a bit like the and the idea, therefore, it helps us understand much about the mitzvahs in general, right? And what it means to be a mitzvah va'osa. You're commanded, and therefore you do something. There's that famous Gemara about Rabbi Huda, yeah, about when he was blind, right? Yeah, and he says, at the beginning, I thought that one who says to me, if a person is potem in a mitzvah, so summa potem in a mitzvah is exempt, I thought, I'll be happy. Why? Because I do it, even though I'm not commanded. Right, but once I learned that it's actually greater to be commanded than not commanded, then I'm happy if someone tells me a blind person, is chayav in mitzvahs, because then I'm doing it because I'm told to do it. It's counterintuitive. When you're actually commanded to do something, in a way it puts you in a better and higher position, but you need to be spurred on to do it, and that's what the Ramban, I think, is highlighting for us here. So I'm going to skip now to Perek Zion Pasuk Chofei, just to briefly bring out, I'm not going to do all of this one, the Ramban, how the Ramban resolves. This is really what we call Parshanut, this Ramban, just explaining a cryptic Pasuk, which again, in a Parsha like Tzav, which is normally Erev Pesach, so many people are, in fact, next year, it is literally Erev Pesach, right? Next year's a leap year. And I believe that normally Tzav on a non-leap year. Next year, Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, but normally Tzav, therefore, is literally on Erev Pesach. But of course, this year, because of the leap year, we don't have that. But if you look at again, as I say, a parsha like Tzav, a lot of people unfortunately don't learn it properly, so they skip over things. And if you look at the Perek Zayin Pasuk Chof Beit, Chof Gimel, Chof Dalet, Chof Hey, you immediately realize the problem. Well, that's straightforward, right? You're not allowed to eat the fats of a shar, an ox, or a kesev, a sheep, or a goat, right? Okay, so you're allowed to use, in other words, it doesn't. This Rashi understands. This means it doesn't cause tumah. That's what it means. You can do any work with it. It doesn't cause tumah. The fats of an avelo and a treifa, but you cannot eat it. Cannot consume it. Now look at the next pasuk. For anyone who eats fats, from an animal from which you offer a fire offering to Hashem, they get kores. Now, what's the problem?
Problem is, you're just told
when you can't eat chaylev. No, the problem is bigger than that. You can't eat chaylev from anything. You can't eat fats from anything. It's not a strafe. So why does this pasuk say you can't eat fats from a korban? Right? That's what it says. From an animal from which you offer an ishel Hashem, you cannot eat the fat. I can't eat the fats from anything. What do you mean? Not specifically from this animal. The Ramban is a long Ramban where he deals with this. And he says, if you look at the third part, second. Yeah. He asked the question right at the beginning. Lo yitochen, he says, it's not possible. It cannot mean from a behemoth, which is the korban, you cannot eat the fat. To exclude chulin. That means non-korbanos. Ki hakosav kvar osar v'seit vayikra stam kol chaylev en sham tnai v'shir. There's nothing left over. We know from Vayikra you cannot eat any fats of the animals, right?
Maybe you only get chorus.
It's interesting, but I don't think so because it is chorus, I think. For
chorus is kiyaku, and I don't know. I'm just suggesting that perhaps it's
but I don't think so. I don't think he brings that as a suggestion. I don't think so. It's a good suggestion, but I don't think so. And he says even here as well. We just saw the previous pasuk says kol chaylev shar v'chesev or eiz. Chaylev of shar chesev eiz you can't eat, right? Etc. etc. Okay, so and anyway, he says the fats of a nevela and a treifa you can't eat as well, and that's clearly not a korban, right? You can't bring a nevela and a treifa to Hashem. Okay, and he goes into then he goes into the whole question of it says the chukas olam l'dor seichem v'chol moshe seichem, therefore all your dwelling places, and this doesn't appear with korbanos. It can't be referring. I think he's saying to korbanos alone. Okay, let's just skip through to where he says where his answer is. His answer basically is that he says v'horaya hagemura, the clear proof. This is a couple of paragraphs after that. She pirush min behema she'akriv mimeno, from the animal from which you offer means min hakorev. It means from the type of animal that is offered up, not the specific korban, but from the type that is offered up, the species. Right there in the context of erachin, those monetary valuations that are given to the Beis Hamikdash or the Mishkan was a result of if a person makes such a vow. There it says the animal from which a korban is offered to Hashem, anything that you give from it to Hashem is kodesh, and there it clearly means the type of animal that you offer a korban from. Okay, and he brings another example as well. So therefore, that's what he means here as well. So he says, look at the next paragraph. Since he forbids, the Torah forbids any fats from an animal from which a korban may be brought, lo min amin shelo yiskarev, but not from a species that is not offered. In other words, what fats are forbidden to us? The fats of animals from which you can bring a korban, because that's how the Ramban is explaining it, right? It's not the fact you can't eat a fat from a korban. It's from you cannot eat fats from any animal that may be offered as a korban, those types of animals, right? That's why he says, I might think that a nevela or a treifa, an animal which is not kosher for one of these reasons, it wasn't shechted properly, or it was not going to survive a trait, right? You might think that that's already called a species from which you do not offer, because you can't offer up a nevela or a treifa. Therefore, that's why the Torah has to tell you that the fats of a nevela or a treifa are also forbidden. That's why it says you shouldn't eat them. They should be like with the punishment of koris, like all other fats. Because anything that is the species, that is the type of animal that is offered up, even if that specific animal is a nevela or a treifa, it's not kosher and therefore can't be offered up, all the fats are forbidden, right? So what the Ramban has done, again, like I said, it's just explaining the explanation of the pasuk, the psukim. Pasuk of Gimel tells us the fats of a shar kesef eiz you cannot eat. The next pasuk says that the fats of a nevela or a treifa, they're not tomei, but you cannot eat them. Again, that's all a bit surprising. Like, why should I think I can eat them? The explanation is because of the next pasuk. Because the next pasuk says, what type of fats are forbidden? The Torah forbids fats that come from an animal from which you are allowed to bring korbanos, from a species from which korbanos may be brought. And because that's the way we're defining the prohibition of chelev, I might think, well, if so, the fats of a nevela or treifa might be allowed, because I cannot bring a korban from those type of animals if it's not shechted properly, etc., etc. And therefore the Torah has to tell us that those are forbidden too, and that the definition of species of animal is broad, and it encompasses any type of animal that is a species that may be offered up, even if that specific one can't, because it might not have been shechted properly, or whatever it is, or it might not be a korban, right? So that's the Ramban. Again, the Ramban is at pains to explain to us the flow of these pesukim and what they mean.
And the Russian go into why it's wrong.
Why it's what?
Why it's wrong.
Why what's wrong? Chalev, why Chalev? It's a bit, yeah. I think I am sure they do. The Ramban does not. The Ramban does not. What exactly the problem is with Chalev? It's a good thing to look into the like the Sefer Chinuch or whatever. You know what I mean? Ramban here is solely focused, and in a way, one of the reasons I wanted to do this Ramban is because to get the breadth and depth of what the Ramban's approach is, it's important to understand how much the Ramban is bothered by just explaining and understanding the psukim. It happens to be that it is. I mean, Rashi deals a little bit with this trefa, nevel and trefa issue. I don't think he deals with this issue of the second pasuk, the one about why it mentions korbanos. But either way, just it's important to understand what the Ramban is trying to do here. Now, if you look at Perek Ches pasuk Aleph, Perek Ches pasuk Aleph is the beginning of the second half of the parasha. Tzav is very clear in two halves. Tzav, right? The first half is continuing explanations of the korbanos, and the sorry, I'm actually going on pasuk Lamed Ches, and the second half is about the inauguration ritual that takes place with Aaron and his son. Now, if you look at Perek pasuk Lamed Ches, which is the last pasuk in the first half of the parsha, right? That it lists beforehand. This is Zos HaTorah la'ola la'mincha v'lachatos v'la'osham v'meluim l'zevach hashlam, all the korbanos. Asher tziva Hashem es Moshe b'har Sinai b'yom tzavosos b'nei Yisrael ha'hakarbos korbanem l'Hashem b'bar Sinai. Now the Ramban is bothered by the structure of this pasuk. It says that Hashem commanded Moshe where on Har Sinai on the day that he commanded the Bnei Yisrael to offer their korbanos to Hashem in Midbar Sinai. What is that repetition of Sinai? Is it Har Sinai? Is it on Har Sinai? Ramban says, first he brings Chazal. Let's skip to the second paragraph. Derech HaPshat, he says the simple explanation of this pasuk is Ashiro. The explanation of that is Asher tziva Hashem es Moshe b'Har Sinai. Hashem commanded Moshe on Har Sinai. Ubiyom tzavosa es b'nei Yisrael b'midbar Sinai la'akribos korbaneim l'Hashem. And on the day he commanded Bnei Yisrael in Midbar Sinai to offer their korbanos to Hashem, Itziva b'miluim b'Har Sinai b'chein ba'ola b'chatos. He commanded the instructions about the miluim, that's the inauguration offerings on Har Sinai, and the ola and the chatos. But Tziva b'mincha v'oshim z'chashlam Midbar Sinai b'Ohel Moed. But the other ones were commanded in Midbar Sinai in the Ohel Moed. So that's the combination of Har Sinai and Midbar Sinai, because some were on Har Sinai, he was told about them, and some in Midbar Sinai. V'yitochin, he says, Kitam b'Har Sinai, b'mokom hazeh lifnei Har Sinai. That this word b'Har Sinai is in front of before Har Sinai, because he says that's inside, that's in the Ohel Moed. And that's also what it means when we say in the Tomid, which we say whenever we say it every day, Olas Tomid, Hoasuya b'Har Sinai. What does that mean? The daily offering that was made, that was done on Har Sinai. What does that mean? It doesn't mean on Har Sinai, says Ramban, literally on Har Sinai. Kinenu b'Har Mamash, because the Aholas Tomid, the daily offering, only began where? In the Ohel Moed, right? So what does it mean? Other examples as well. It means in front of Har Sinai. And what is going on here? What is the significance of this? He says that the Klal Yisrael, just sort of summarize outside, they encamped in front of Har Sinai, close to the mountain. They were close to the mountain. And there they stayed until they journeyed forward. And they made the Ohel Moed, and they set it up in front of the mountain, in the east of the mountain, and they began there the Olas Tomid. They began the Olas Tomid, and then the daily offering. And the second year, they were commanded about everything else, where to set up the oil, etc., etc. And the Degolim and the flags and everything else, and where they were supposed to encamp. And therefore, what the Torah is trying to tell us here is that Hashem commanded them on Har Sinai, b'yom tzavosa, on the day of his command, in Midbar Sinai. That it was both Har Sinai and in Midbar Sinai, meaning to tell us, what does that mean? Was it or was it not? Was it on Har Sinai? Was it in the desert? The answer is that it wasn't exactly on the mountain, the place where he was given the Aseret HaDibros, and it also wasn't in the desert of Sinai after traveling away. It was in Midbar Sinai in front of the mountain. That's where it was. Okay, so another good example how the Ramban explains us the simple meaning of the pasuk. Asher tziva Hashem es Moshe b'Har Sinai. Hashem, where was that? On Har Sinai, but not literally on Har Sinai. Midbar Sinai. So it was in front of Har Sinai because that's the qualification that Midbar Sinai gives you, okay, in the desert, right? That's the Ramban there on that posuk. The next Ramban explains the second half of what the second half of the focus is of the second half of the parsha. It's a very interesting debate between the Ramban and Rashi. Rashi says on this posuk Kaches Aaron, what is it telling us? You have to take Aaron, you have to anoint them, everything else. This was 7 days, says Rashi, before the Mishkan was built, right? Before the Mishkan was actually set up. Now we know when the Mishkan was set up because it's the end of Parshas Pekudei, right? That's when Moshe Rabbeinu sets up the Mishkan, right? And therefore, how can you understand it was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan? And this parsha was on the 23rd of Adar. It was 7 days before. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is what? Is Yom Hashmini. Yes, Vayi Yom Hashmini is the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? That day was the day that took all those crowns. Special things happened on the 8th day. Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Chof Gimel Adar is next week. 23rd of Adar is the beginning of the 7 days, the 7 Yimei HaMiluim. So when Moshe Rabbeinu finally sets up the Mishkan, that is on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? Okay, and the 7 days before, he was actually taking it down and setting it up again, etc., right? But it was established on Rosh Chodesh. Ramban brings Rashi, and he says, "V'loma nahafech divrei Elokim Chaim." Why should we turn around the words of the living God? In other words, to make this whole parsha actually having taken place afterwards. So he's interesting because he doesn't like to go with, as Rashi says, ein muktam u'mulcha b'Torah, that there is no against the chronological order in the Torah. There, when it talks about in Shemos, on the first day, on the first day of the Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, or there Rosh Chodesh Nisan, he talks about establishing the Mishkan. He talks about what Aaron should wear and everything else, and the actions of Moshe Rabbeinu, and it doesn't mention with Aaron and his sons anything until here, right? So how can it possibly be that they're split into 2 parshas and the one that came first is delayed till afterwards? So he says like this, that we should say as follows. The correct approach, he says, is like this. They were commanded to set up the Mishkan on 23rd of Adar. They set it up then. Once it stood on its place, Hashem called to him, Shehu Yoshev HaKruvim, sitting on the Kruvim. This is the Shechina is present, but Tzivah Yisrael Ma'aser Korbanos. And then Hashem commanded him on all of the actions of the Korbanos, all of the description, everything else. Right? From the beginning of Vayikra until here, because he had to know what to do before they were actually offered up anything. Right? That's what's going on. Because in the inauguration offerings, what do you have? You've got all sorts of korbanos, like a sin offering, and you have to know what they do, what they consist of, which is all just explained in Vayikra. Okay? You're not going to know how to carry them out, except for the parshas that have gone before. Then he says to him, take Aaron and his children with him, to spur him on at the time of the action itself, that which he had said originally, because in the parallel parsha to Tzav is to Tzaveh. The second half of Tzav is the parallel to Tzav, right? Where it explains what he was supposed to do with him. And he says, this is what you should do with him, etc., inaugurate him, etc. And here it's added on to. And here it's added on to as well that you have to do it where everyone is present, the whole Eidah, Ma'amad Kulam, so that they should know that Hashem had chosen Aaron and his descendants. So whereas Rashi understands that this whole parsha was actually said before the Mishkan was set up, and the Mishkan, in the way the Torah spells out, is the Mishkan is set up, and then it's afterwards that really this came before the setting up of the Mishkan. The Ramban disagrees. And the Ramban says, no, this is in exactly the right place, chronologically, in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu is told to set up the Mishkan on the 23rd of Adar, which he does, which is the beginning of the 7 days, right? Yeah. And once it's up, and it's standing there, he is told, these are the details of all the korbanos. Then you get to this point in time, which has already been mentioned earlier, the instruction of what's going to happen with Aaron, and it's spelt out now, and he's told again at the time when it's going to happen to take Aaron, to encourage him, to explain to him what he's got to do and everything else, etc., etc. And what's added on here is the fact that everyone has to be there, the whole of Klal Yisrael. Okay? And then he says, Val derech hayoshar, the straight way of understanding this is, so now he's got to resolve one other thing, which is discussed elsewhere in Shemos. What comes first? Was the Mishkan only there after the Egel Azov? Was it meant to be before? How does that work? So he says Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to build the Mishkan before the Egel. Again, he's being consistent. That everything is in the right order. You understand? Truma to Tzava, it's all happened before the Egel Azov, right? Others disagree. But Hashem forgave the Bnei Yisrael to the extent, there's always a remembrance, there's always something of the Egel Azov, but Hashem ki Racham B'Chanan, and you have the second set of Luchos and everything else, and the Shekhinah will come down. Yoda me'atzmoi. It's an amazing thing. Moshe Rabbeinu knew himself. Shemitzas HaMishkan b'Mekomo Emedes. That command of the Mishkan that he had already been told about was still in place. Because he knew that. Because once Hashem had said that he will forgive the Bnei Yisrael after the Egel Azov, Moshe Rabbeinu knew we can now bring him to place what I'd already been told about, which was the Mishkan. But Sivli Yisrael Aleh, Vayakel, then he tells the Bnei Yisrael about it in Vayakel, right? As he says, I explained in Vayakel. Once they completed it, he's told about when it will be set up on Rosh Chodesh. And there it says, you shall bring the Aaron and his sons. That's all in Parshas Pekudei. And he knew Shekam Aaron Abonov Ma'alosam B'chibosim Lifnei Amokim, that they remain at their lofty status in front of Hashem. This is now a repetition of that command that was said in Tetzaveh, but it's repeated, and it's spelled out in Pekudei, but it is repeated here on the first day of the Miluim. That's what this is going to be, basically. This is the first day of the Miluim, he says, of the 7 days of B'Shas Maisa, and the time of the action itself. So it seems to be that he's not disputing, right, that we are standing here at the point of the first of the 7 days. Everyone agrees to that. That this is taking place on the first of the 7 days of the Miluim, right? The days of the Miluim. That seems to be, the Ramban seems to agree to that. But he says, "V'nei kol ha'parshas kasidron." Everything is in order. All the parshas are in order. It takes place that he's commanded to do. He sets up the Mishkan, and the construction of the Mishkan is there in Pekudei on that very first day of the 7 days. And it seems, according to Ramban, all of the instruction of the Kabbalah is also given then, right? The whole of Vayikra and Tzav and everything else. And you get to this point. You get to this point where he's also told just before the 7 days are about to. It seems at the beginning of the 7 days as well, right? This is what Aaron's going to need to do. Okay. There's only one thing which is a bit difficult, which is the words that in Pekudei it says that the cloud covered the oil moed. And that's difficult because we know the Shekhinah did not descend until the 8th day, right? The reason why that posuk is there, because it completes the whole story of the establishment of the Mishkan. We don't end the matter halfway. So the reason why Pekudei says, in the Pekudei, right, that the Shekhinah comes down is because that's the completion of the Mishkan. So it's there is one aspect, that one posuk, you have to say that completes the topic, and that's why it's over there. Whereas in reality, that takes place on the 8th day. And the 8th day. But essentially, the Ramban here is defending, that's the purpose of this Ramban, is to defend the Seder, is to defend the order, right? Not like Rashi. Rashi understands that, in fact, all of this took place, all takes place beforehand. All this takes place beforehand. And the real difference that it comes out in terms of, it seems, between Rashi and the Ramban is how to understand that whole part of Parshas Pekudei, which talks about Moshe Rabbeinu setting up the Mishkan, where it says he established the Mishkan. According to Rashi says that final Hakomas HaMishkan is when? Is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Therefore, Rashi and this was on the 23rd of Adar. So this must have taken place beforehand, and it's out of order. Whereas the Ramban understands that is also the 23rd of Adar. the description in Pekudei is also the first day of the Miluim, the same as this one, right? And the only one bit that's out of order, effectively, is the pasuk which says the Shekhinah descends at the end of Pekudei, and that's placed there to complete the whole topic. Really, the Shekhinah descends on Yom Shmini L'Miluim on the 8th day. So it's very important we understand now this machlokas. As I say, a lot of this share has been about the pshat, which is very important. We often miss that. So we've been able to learn some of that together. Okay, I wish you all a very good Shabbos.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.